On the morning of February 20th, 2026, the United States Supreme Court delivered a verdict that reverberated through every trading floor, every shipping port, and every manufacturing hub on the face of the earth. By a vote of 6-3, the highest court in the land struck down the sweeping emergency tariffs that President Donald Trump had erected as bulwarks against what he called a flood of foreign exploitation. The International Emergency Economic Powers Act, a Cold War-era statute designed to confront genuine threats to national security, could not, the justices ruled, be bent into a cudgel for reshaping the entire architecture of global commerce. The tariffs on Canadian goods tied to the fentanyl crisis, the so-called reciprocal duties slapped on virtually every nation that traded with America, all of it nullified in a single morning. For a brief, breathless moment, the world exhaled. Shipping companies began recalculating freight costs. Importers, who had paid billions in elevated duties, glimpsed the possibility of refunds. Stock futures surged. And then, within hours before the ink on the ruling had dried, before cable news anchors had finished parsing the legalese, President Trump stepped before the cameras and called the decision terrible. He excoriated the justices, and he announced, effective immediately, a new 10% tariff on all goods entering the United States, this time invoking different statutory authorities. Sections 2, 32, 122, and 301 of the Trade Expansion Act. The court had closed one door. The president kicked open another. This was not improvisation. This was not a tantrum dressed in policy clothing. This was the latest iteration of a strategy, nearly a century in the making, a relentless dance between executive ambition and legal constraint, between the seductive power of the tariff and the chaos it unleashes. To understand what happened on that February morning and to grasp what it means for the $3 trillion in goods that flow into American ports each year, we must go back. Back to the very moment the United States first discovered just how catastrophic a tariff can be, and how, paradoxically, that catastrophe planted the seeds for every escalation that followed. The year is 1930. America is stumbling into the abyss of the Great Depression, and two Republican legislators, Senator Reed Smoot of Utah and Representative Willis-Hawley of Oregon, believe they have a remedy: protect American industry, raise the walls. Their bill, the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, lands on the desk of President Herbert Hoover on June 17, 1930. It raises duties on more than 20,000 imported goods to an average of 59% on dutiable items. It is, at the time, the most aggressive tariff schedule in American history. 1,028 economists sign a petition begging Hoover not to sign it. He signs it anyway. The consequences are swift and merciless. 25 countries retaliate with tariffs of their own. Canada, America's largest trading partner, raises duties on 16 categories of American goods within weeks. Britain turns inward, embracing imperial preference. France and Germany erect their own barriers. Global trade does not merely slow, it collapses. Between 1930 and 1933, American imports fall by 66%. Exports plunge 61%. Factories that depended on foreign markets shutter. Farms that sold grain and cotton overseas watch their crops rot. The Depression, already devastating, metastasizes into something far worse. A worldwide contagion of economic nationalism that poisons diplomacy, inflames resentment, and, many historians argue, lays the kindling for the conflicts that will consume the next decade. Smoot-Hawley becomes a cautionary tale. For a generation, it is the ghost that haunts every trade negotiation, but embedded within the wreckage is a dangerous lesson, one that will take decades to fully manifest. The tariff, when wielded by the executive, is an instrument of extraordinary power. The question is not whether it should exist, but who controls it, and under what authority. Enter 1962. The Cold War is at its zenith. President John F. Kennedy needs flexibility to negotiate with allies and punish adversaries. Congress, chastened by the memory of Smoot-Hawley, but unwilling to surrender trade policy entirely, passes the Trade Expansion Act. It is sponsored by the powerful Arkansas congressman Wilbur Mills, and it gives the presidency something it has never had before: a suite of statutory tools to impose tariffs unilaterally. Section 232 allows the President to restrict imports that threaten national security. Section 301 targets unfair trade practices by foreign governments. Section 122 permits temporary duties to address balance of payments crises. These provisions are written broadly, deliberately ambiguous, designed for a world in which threats move faster than legislative deliberation. For decades, these tools sit largely dormant. Presidents use them sparingly, surgically, as leverage in negotiations rather than as instruments of wholesale economic transformation. The global trading system, anchored by the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, and later the World Trade Organization, pushes relentlessly toward lower barriers. The ghost of Smoot-Hawley fades from living memory, and then, in the spring of 2018, it returns. President Donald Trump, 6 months into a trade war of rhetoric, makes it real. 25% on steel imports, 10% on aluminum. The justification is Section 232, national security. Critics are baffled. American steel mills are operating at more than 70% capacity. The national security argument is, at best, a stretch. But the statute does not define its terms with precision, and no court intervenes with sufficient speed. By summer, the tariffs expand. $34 billion in Chinese goods hit with 25% duties on July 6th, $16 billion more on August 23rd, $200 billion at rates climbing from 10 to 25% by the following spring. By the end of 2019, $380 billion in Chinese goods are subject to elevated tariffs. Steel prices in the United States rise 20 to 30%. American farmers, caught in the retaliatory crossfire, receive billions in emergency subsidies. The playbook is established. Invoke a statute, impose the tariff, dare the courts and Congress to stop you, and if they do, invoke a different statute. This is the architecture that Trump carries into his second term. On February 1st, 2025, the day after his second inauguration, he signs executive orders imposing 25% duties on goods from Canada and Mexico, and 10% on Canadian energy. The legal basis this time is the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA, and the declared emergency is the flow of fentanyl across American borders. It is a novel and audacious interpretation. IEEPA was designed to freeze assets and block transactions during genuine national security crises, not to restructure trade relationships with America's two largest partners. But Trump is not finished. On April 2nd, 2025, the administration launches what it calls its reciprocal tariff policy, a 10% baseline duty on all imports from every country on Earth layered atop existing rates. Canada and Mexico face a cumulative 25%. China, already battered by years of escalating duties, sees rates that stack multiplicatively. Fentanyl tariffs plus reciprocal tariffs climbing toward a staggering 145%. The legal stacking is deliberate, a fortress built from overlapping statutes, each one providing cover for the others. The tactics are ruthless in their sophistication. Exemptions are dangled and withdrawn like bait. Automobiles compliant with the CUSMA trade agreement are spared. Canadian potash duties drop to 10%, a gesture designed to divide Ottawa from its western provinces. American technology is exempted from Chinese retaliatory measures through quiet, back-channel negotiations. The de minimis threshold, an $800 exemption that has fueled the explosion of direct-to-consumer e-commerce from China, is eliminated by Executive Order 14324 on August 29, 2025. A precision strike against platforms like Temu and Shein that bypasses the headline tariff entirely and always. The rhetoric. Truth Social posts announcing 90-day pauses, except for China, sending markets into wild swings. Threats of 50% duties on Canadian steel, 50% on Brazilian goods tied not to trade at all, but to the trial of former President Jair Bolsonaro. Tariffs linked to Ontario electricity pricing, tariffs tied to the purchase of Gulfstream jets. The line between trade policy and personal leverage dissolves entirely. Then the courts begin to push back. On May 28, 2025, the U.S. Court of International Trade blocks the IEEPA-based tariffs, ruling that the President has exceeded the authority Congress granted under the statute. The administration appeals. The ruling is briefly overturned the next day, but the legal ground is shifting. The question is migrating upward toward the institution that has the final word. And so we arrive at February 20th, 2026. The Supreme Court, by a 6-3 margin, invalidates the IEEPA-based tariff regime. The emergency powers designed to combat genuine threats to national security cannot be repurposed as a general-purpose trade weapon. The fentanyl tariffs on Canada, the global reciprocal duties, all of it falls. Checkmate. But here is what the justices cannot do. They cannot repeal Sections 2, 32, 122, and 301 of the Trade Expansion Act. Those statutes remain on the books, their language as broad and ambiguous as the day Wilbur Mills shepherded them through Congress. And so, within hours of the ruling, the new 10% global tariff emerges, dressed in different legal clothing but functionally identical in its intent. This is the direct lineage, the unbroken thread that stretches from Herbert Hoover's desk in 1930 to a Truth Social post in 2026. Smoot-Hawley demonstrated that tariffs, wielded without restraint, can collapse global trade. That collapse terrified Congress into delegating trade authority to the executive, birthing the 1962 Act. That act created the tools. Trump discovered that those tools could be stacked, layered, and reinterpreted to achieve effects their authors never imagined. When the courts closed one avenue, the statutes themselves provided the detour. The circle is closing, and the world is watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden machinery of trade, make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. Thanks for watching.